All right, let's take a look at our next article, which is from a source we don't typically go to, searchengineland.com. Twitter rolls back AMP support, no longer sends users to AMP pages. And so I got to say, I'm actually not familiar with that term, but
really?
What is a Twitter?
Not the bowling alley, AMP, right?
So I'm somewhat surprised. So I threw this article in because it's something that I'm passionate about, but you guys don't know what AMP pages are, and I'm surprised. So let's start with that. So AMP stands for Accelerated Mobile Pages, and it's something that Google introduced several years ago that they announced it as, hey, this will make the web better. But in reality, what it did is it gave Google an extra level of control over people's browser experience, regardless of what browser they used. The idea was that if you're on a mobile device and you go to a web page, you don't need really big pictures. You don't need fancy JavaScript because a lot of that stuff isn't going to work on the phone anyway. So they introduced a protocol that would let websites render a different web page when you were on mobile. And you guys have probably experienced this where you go to a web page and all of a sudden your navigation buttons disappear and your address bar disappears and you get a gray bar at the top which has its own back button. You're like locked into this crazy world. And
Locked into this crazy
Where am I?
it's frustrating as hell.
We
Like,
are down the rabbit hole.
don't take away my navigation buttons. Like that's a
Yeah.
well, it's a dick move, is what
Yeah,
it is.
there
That's
you
right. So, but what happened was Google. They're the
Don
ones.
Pezet, ladies and gentlemen.
I know. I am passionate about this one because I
Apparently.
hate AMP so much. Like it's just terrible. It doesn't contribute anything really to us, right? Almost every web page out there is responsive, so it'll render fine on mobile. You don't need AMP to do it. But Google wanted it done because Google controlled it. When you create an AMP page, Google actually caches the elements of that AMP page. So when you go to a search engine or Google News or whatever and click a link, it's actually rendering your page from their cache, not even from your server. So you don't get like hits on your server. You can't track user access anymore. You're reliant on Google to provide it to you.
And that's the way they like it.
So when they first announced it, people ignored it because that's stupid, right? But then Google said, oh, by the way, if you want to be in the top of the search list, you got to have an AMP page.
Oh.
And
So you know what that tells me? It tells me that they find that very important for them to be able to control
oh yeah,
what it is, right? Like,
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like Google.
they
No,
want your
not at
browser. They want you to use Chrome. But if you don't use Chrome, if you use Safari or Firefox or Brave or whatever, well, you go to an AMP page, now they get that same control. They've locked you in. So it's bad. It's bad for the internet. Even one of the original creators of AMP has come out and said, like, this is not good. The way Google is doing it is not right. This is not what I intended it to be. Well, Google finally announced they were going to relax the rules on top-rated websites requiring an AMP page, especially on their news service. And overnight, companies have started turning that off. Well, Twitter just announced they are turning off AMP support on Twitter. In fact, I think it's already rolled out across the whole site. It looks like LinkedIn is following suit. And so if, like me, you've been super frustrated by AMP, it looks like the end is in sight. It looks like 2022 will be the end of AMP.
all right, finally, we're telling a story about chucking some dirt on AMP
Yes. Yeah.
that we didn't even know about
Technology you
until,
didn't know about.
yeah.
But I mean, have you experienced pages like that, though?
So yeah, I mean that makes sense. I've I play around with changing my user agent a lot, which looking for differences in websites between different user agents and vulnerabilities therein. So yeah, I experience that when I go to a mobile user agent on my browser. You'll get a different experience. It'll look different. You go to the mobile page instead of the regular page. But correct me if I'm wrong. There's also like mobile pages that aren't AMP pages, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you go to one of our pages,
Right.
they're
it's
responsive.
responsive,
They render appropriate for a phone.
Right.
So you don't need AMP.
But that's why we don't show up in Google.
Right.
And
That's what it was showing.
and the original argument was, well, we lower the quality of pictures so the pages load faster and they load out of our cache. But everybody's got 5G or
Right.
whatever, and
don't
so
need
it's nice and fast. I've actually gone the extent of I run a third-party application on my phone that intercepts AMP links. And so I have an iPhone. So anytime I hit an AMP page, it actually redirects me to the regular page. And today, well, depending on when this podcast is released, but today we're filming. So my 3-day history, 222. It's called Amplosion is the name of the
Nice.
program. So there have been 222 Amplosions on my phone. That's how pervasive this stuff is.
See, I just use links and stick in IRC chat rooms. And
there you go.
I'm good to go.
I feel like, I mean, if that's, assuming that's not 100% of the pages you visit a lot of pages in 3 days.
You do
I-
on your phone.
I read a lot of news.
Dude, I don't know how people browse on their phone, bro.
Because what percentage of pages would you say were AMP pages?
Well, many of those will be a page that I go to repeatedly.
Okay.
So, like, if you go to
every time
Google
you go,
News
yeah.
and you click on an article, right, it might send you to CNN or Fox News. They all have AMP,
Yeah.
and so every time you're clicking on an article, that would be one of those hits.
What I learned here is Don has a problem.
Somebody's got to stay up to date, otherwise this podcast has nothing to talk about.
That's true. Yeah.
We're going to talk about Scrooge McDuck if you.
Yeah. We'll get back into that's next week, right?
Yeah,
When-
that's it.
All
That's
right.
it. Don, you're out next week? Yeah, Scrooge McDuck.
Scrooge McDuck time.
Talk about his lucky dime.
Oh, man.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Nice.
I got to get a Scrooge McDuck sound on the.
You don't know what
on the
AMP is, but
soundboard
you
here.
know what the lucky dime is.
Darn right.
Yeah.
Darn right I do.
Stuff's important.
Because that, right. See, thank you. Peter gets it.
If you enjoyed that segment, be sure to check out our entire podcast available in the playlist right here. And you can always subscribe to stay up to date with the latest tech news and other happenings in the IT world. Be sure to tune in every Thursday for new episodes. I hope to see you there.